Thanks. I'm Karthik. This is joint work with a bunch of authors from a bunch of places. All right, that's good. All right, so I've got not too much time, so I'll try to give you a sense of what we've been doing and what we've done for this work. But I'd also encourage you to go to that website over there, smacktls.com. It's got some fun demo videos that you might enjoy watching, perhaps more than listening to me. All right, so the problem we're trying to address here is how to implement correctly Agile cryptographic protocols, by which I mean protocols like TLS, SSH, IKE, which are really not protocols in themselves, but protocol frameworks, because they allow the client and the server to negotiate a large variety of crypto parameters. You can negotiate what key exchange we're going to use, what encryption scheme we're going to use, what an authentication mechanism we're going to use in the protocol while we are running it. All right, so how do you implement these correctly, and what goes wrong if you don't do it correctly? The protocol that I'm going to look at today is transport layer security. We all know this as the protocol behind HTTPS. It's an old protocol, more than 20 years old, many, many versions. And this is important because it means that the protocol and its implementations have a ton of churn. So there's new features coming in and old features getting obsolete. And sometimes there's a lot of legacy features that you have to deal with. There are dozens of implementations, which I discovered to my surprise when doing this work. And there are many security theorems, nice security theorems, except that the security theorems often are not for the artifacts that we care about, which is the implementations. So some of this work is really going to try to figure out what is there in the space between what is proved and what we actually want to run, what are our implementations. So the protocol itself is, well, I think we've seen it in many places, but it's good to kind of look at the structure. This begins with a negotiation phase called hello, where the client and the server agree upon what protocol they're going to run. Then there is a key exchange phase, where the two parties contribute key materials in order to get session keys set up. And then there is a key confirmation phase called finished, where the client and the server kind of exchange their entire transcript to make sure they're both on the same page. And then they start encrypting data towards each other. So this is a very sort of uniform framework, and there are many different instantiations of it. So the most common one, for example, might be you might want to do RSA Key Transport, in which case in the middle KEM phase, the authenticated key exchange phase, the client is going to encrypt something for the server and send it over. Or you might want to do a Diffie-Hellman-based key exchange, in which case the rest of the framework doesn't change. It's pretty uniform. It's just that in the middle, in the KEM phase, we decide to do something else, which is that we do a proper Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So this is just to illustrate that there's a large part of the protocol framework which is shared, and some bits you can pull out and replace with others. And this is where the kind of the composition question starts coming in. So suppose I wrote a state machine for the RSA key exchange, which is the one on the left, which is like a sequence of messages that I expect to send and receive. And I write another state machine for the Diffie-Hellman key exchange in the middle. You'll see that most of the messages look similar. The only real difference is that there is one extra message, the server key exchange message, which is the one in the oval if you're sitting at the back, which is new in the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So we can really share a lot of the processing code for the different messages, and that's what most TLS implementations do. So to combine those two state machines, one way of doing this is, well, okay, what you're going to do is keep the same state machine with one conditional branch. After the server certificate, if it is RSA, I'm going to skip the server key exchange, otherwise I'm going to go straight through. So this is a very simple example of just the two of the most common key exchanges in TLS, but this is kind of illustrative, because you'll see that even though this seems quite obvious, many people get this particular bit wrong, okay, and that leads to lots of attacks. So in general, of course, on the web, there are a lot of other features of TLS. So the state machine looks a little bit more like the one on the right side of this thing. The details are not important. The interesting thing is there's lots of branches, but there's no loops. It's kind of a fairly simple state machine. So what we did a few years ago was to implement this protocol, which is RSA and DHE and resumption and so on, in this reference implementation called MeTLS. And we proved it secure. We proved it secure both for functional correctness as well as for cryptographic security. We published it at Oakland here. And then a follow-up at Crypto, and you can go look at that code over there. But the thing is, this is about reference code written in F#, which is a functional programming language. It doesn't really apply to like OpenSSL, which is the code that most people care about. So, but could we use the same kind of techniques to actually verify all of OpenSSL? So that's kind of a natural next question to ask. And it's a scary question to ask, because if you look at the OpenSSL state machine, it's way more complex than what even I showed you in the last slide. Because OpenSSL does not just support the things I showed you before, it supports a ton of other features, some of which are for legacy reasons, some of which are for niche applications, and so on. And you might say, well, let's just forget about these useless things. We just care about the ones used on the web. So why not just verify the part of the OpenSSL that does that are used by web browsers and web servers? But we can't do that because the code for these weird, let's say, key exchanges is actually sharing a lot of the code with the code for the ones that we care about. Not only that, even the long-term keys in some cases are actually shared across them. So it's not so easy to address this problem straight off. So I'm going to step back a little, and I'm going to say, let's forget about this scary state machine. Let's ask a simpler question. Just for the web configurations, does OpenSSL satisfy or conform with the state machine I showed you before that have proved correct, that you have all kinds of nice proofs for from various cryptographers? So to do this, we built a fuzzing framework. Okay? It's a specification-based testing framework. We took our reference implementation, TLS, on top of which we built a testing framework, and we used it to generate tons of non-conformant traces and executed them against various TLS clients and servers to see whether or not they do the same state machine that we do, and why not. And of course, what we found was that there were tons and tons of bugs. So what do I mean by a bug? A bug is an unexpected state transition where either your client or your server is accepting a message it's not supposed to accept, or it's allowing a message to be skipped, which it should not allow to be skipped. So on the right-hand side, that is the state machine for OpenSSL, as we discovered by testing, which involves all the red arrows are those where the client is allowing extra transitions, which it should not be allowing, and on the green ones are the server allowing extra transitions. And a lot of these are actually exploitable. So we had CVE, so many of these libraries, but you have to ask kind of a high-level question. We found bugs in almost all the implementations we tested, yeah? So where are all these bugs coming from? What is the core reason behind them in all these independent pieces of code? And is it because they're not exploitable? They've been there forever, so how come they've not been found before? So what we would point our finger at is actually the TLS spec. Because the TLS spec actually does not tell you what the state machine is. It defines the protocol as a ladder diagram with optional messages. So the thing in the little sort of diamond there is there are these things which are marked with a star which are supposed to be optional, which means you can skip them. But it doesn't say under what conditions you can skip them. And the idea is at the end of the handshake, well, anyway, the client and the server will exchange their transcript, so maybe we'll detect any weirdnesses that have happened at that point. But this is not entirely true. Because, okay, let's start from the optional message style and see how would the client and the server implement it. So this is how we decided to compose RSA and DHE earlier. But if you use the optional message style, what many implementations do is, in fact, what they say is, well, server key exchange is optional, which means that the server gets to decide whether or not it's going to send it, and the client has to just deal with it. This is sort of a weird version of Postel's principle where the client is willing to accept a lot of things that the server might do. It's be liberal in what the server does. But there are two dangerous cases, of course. So suppose I'm doing a regular RSA key exchange where there is not supposed to be a server key exchange message. Now, what if I get one? What am I going to do? Similarly, in a DHE key exchange where I expect a server key exchange message, if I don't get one, what am I going to do? Ideally, you would just close the connection. You'd say, no, this is no good. But in fact, in reality, lots of clients accept the connection, do unexpected crypto computations, and then completely break the security of the connection because of that. So here's one example. It's against Java. So suppose you wanted to impersonate google.com to a Java client. What you would do is let it connect to you, give it Google certificate. Then because you don't have Google's private key, you cannot actually send the server key exchange message. It requires a signature. So what? We just skip it. We skip the next message. We skip the next message. We skip the next message. We skip all the way. We skip the CCS message which says, let's start encrypting. We don't want to encrypt. Let's skip that too. But we have to finish the handshake, and we haven't done any of the key exchange, so there is no keys to finish the handshake with. But hey, let's use all zeros, right? And maybe Java will accept, and it will. So now you can start exchanging application data completely unencrypted, which means that from the time Java has started supporting the Oracle JSSC, the Sun JDK, has started doing TLS, from that point on till March of this year, Java clients offered no confidentiality and no integrity against a network attacker, zero. Okay? And you might say, this is weird. Maybe this is just Java, right? This is like 4 different state machine bugs. But we found similar bugs in at least 3 other implementations. So there is something symptomatic here about how these things are implemented. Then you might say, well, okay, that's because you skipped messages. But if you inject a new message, like a server key exchange message when it's not expected, like in RSA, that is an unexpected new message. I will definitely reject that. But no, we won't, because there is this thing called export RSA, right? So TLS 1.0 in the 1990s, because of export restrictions on cryptography, introduced these export cipher suites, which were limited to at most 512 bits for asymmetric keys, both Diffie-Hellman and RSA keys. And these keys, so what would happen is you connect to a server with RSA. It says, oh, you're connecting from outside the US. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate I'm going to use my 512-bit key, and I'm going to send it to you in a server key exchange, and I'm going to sign it with my regular 2048-bit key. And now these 512-bit keys are known to be like really, really obsolete. I mean, the NSA thought they could break this in the 1990s. That's why they introduced this regulation anyway. And it's known to be broken even for academics since 2000. So it's deprecated. Nobody uses it. None of the browsers offer it. OpenSSL doesn't offer it by default as a client. So really, this is dead code, right? But it's still there. It's still there in all the libraries. There is code to handle this extra message. And you can make it live code if you send a server key exchange message during RSA, which is unexpected. But if you send it, this piece of dead code, which is still living in there for 15 years after being deprecated, will get activated. This results in a nice man-in-the-middle attack. We call it FREAK, for fracturing RSA export keys. And the attack is basically, it requires, it's a man-in-the-middle, so he's a good client, a buggy client who accepts server key exchange messages in RSA, is trying to connect to a buggy server, which supports RSA export. And in the middle, the man-in-the-middle is what he's going to do is going to let the connection go through, but downgrade it to RSA export, break the 512-bit key, and then take over the connection and therefore impersonate the server. There are so many preconditions to this. You need to have a buggy server, a buggy client. You need to be able to break the key. But unfortunately, all of this is fairly easy. So the ZMAP guys at the University of Michigan did an internet-wide study. They found 37% of browser-tested servers out there still support RSA export. So this is considered vaguely safe because nobody asks for it, right? So if nobody asks for it, it never gets used. So it's OK. And factoring, well, and these sites included some nice high-profile sites like the NSA and HSBC. And then the next step is, well, how can you factor these keys? That's probably requires government-level strength, right? But 512-bit keys are trivial now. So Nadia Henninger showed us that she could take keys from us and break it in about 12 hours on Amazon EC2 for a cost of $100. And this is actually useful because these keys are reused by servers until they're rebooted, so they could be alive for weeks. And the last step is, well, OK, you found one bug in OpenSSL. Surely that's not the end of the road. But he said, no, this is not just one bug in OpenSSL. This exact same bug was in OpenSSL, in IBM JSSE, in Microsoft S-Channel, in Apple Secure Transport. So it just seems to be like everywhere. So there were CVEs for all of these things issued because, well, the client was buggy, the server was buggy, the keys were breakable. And it leads us to ask the question, OK, so let's see, well, can you do better? Can we actually prove something about our implementation rather than sort of relying on some short-term mitigations to avoid attacks? So all of these problems I showed you, I was discussing, these attacks come because the state machine is not correct. There are bugs in it. We know what the state machine is supposed to do. Everybody who knows TLS will agree that certain of these traces should not be accepted, but they are. So how difficult would it be to take something like this, the OpenSSL code, prove that it actually conforms to its state machine? So this is what we did. One of our students, what he did was he took the OpenSSL code. He extracted out the client and server state machines, which were actually quite a bit of a mess because they have to deal with all kinds of protocol versions, extensions. There are various optional features. There are various experimental features. And what he did was he rewrote the code. It doesn't increase the code size, actually, just sort of cleaned it up, rewrote the code in about 750 lines of C, and added to it about 460 lines of specification. And these 460 lines basically were encoding the state machine that I just showed you in the previous slide. It looks horrible, but it is kind of fairly easy to formalize. And this formal specification was very close to what we already had used for MeTLS when we were proving the security of it. So we have high confidence that this spec that we wrote for OpenSSL is actually the right one. Then we use this tool called FramaC, but there are many other tools for verifying C code against logical specs. We just happen to use this one. And we could prove that this OpenSSL state machine, the core bit of OpenSSL, does implement the right state machine. So we could do that. And this took about 1 month of effort from a PhD student. So there's no reason to think that this is sort of out of reach for production developers and so on. And the big advantage is, well, you do this once, you eliminate all the state machine bugs in OpenSSL in one fell swoop, well, state machine bugs of the category that I've been discussing. And really, there is no impact on performance. So we tested it. We did. There was no measurable impact. So I'm going to conclude. And the conclusions that we have from this work is that, first of all, cryptographic protocol testing, to our surprise, is hard and easy at the same time. So I mean, we did something fairly naive, right? I mean, we did, OK, it's a specification-based test framework. But really, in the end, you could just think of it as fuzzing. And we found dozens of bugs. So we shouldn't be doing this. It's protocol developers who should be doing this. And we need to kind of figure out a way of making this more part of the testing methodology. There is this myth that open source code, because tons of people are looking at it, is less vulnerable to attack. But I think all of these various problems that people have found in the last few years on OpenSSL falsifies this. So just having tons of people looking at code doesn't help when the bugs could be fairly subtle security and crypto-related bugs. Those things don't seem to shake out. They seem to lie in there for years. On the bright side, I think the approach we would advocate is, rather than trying to fuzz things and so on, you might have better mileage if you actually try to verify your production code directly. We've shown that you can do this for a small, tiny bit of OpenSSL. It's certainly not all of it, but it's a good first step. And I think our experience with MeTLS also encourages us that you can actually do serious proofs about running code of crypto protocols. And the last sort of bit is the cautionary tale of Freak. Freak, the attack occurs because there is this export ciphers that were introduced to deliberately weaken crypto 20 years ago or 15, 16 years ago. And there is no reason for these to live on, but they do. So there is a cautionary tale for deliberately weakening cryptography for short-term gains, because it turns out that these things live on forever. So I'm at the end of my talk, and I'm happy to take questions.
So I believe everyone has addressed the Freak vulnerability, but have the vendors you've talked to addressed the broader state machine vulnerabilities that you found?
So yes. So it depends on the vendor.
Name names.
So the ones that are immediately exploitable, where you can show that you can actually break it completely, they get fixed very quickly. But there could be lots of weirdnesses in the state machine which sort of lead to a crash later or something, which don't really lead to a full fail. Mm-hmm. And those ones, sometimes just people don't want to fix them because it takes too much effort, because it might break something else, they don't know, and so on. So the Java state machine, for example, it has fixed the vulnerability I showed you, but it still has lots of weirdnesses in there. I think it might well lead to other attacks.
I'm wondering if you could reduce the burden on developers of verification even further, but instead of trying to fully verify the state machine, just verify the simpler property that the finished message can't be skipped. Because part of the design of the protocol, the intent was the finished message conveys this hash of the transcript, and if you don't have any weak key exchange algorithms, and if the finished message can't be skipped, then hopefully man-in-the-middle attacks will be prevented. So could you get, I don't know, 80% of the benefit or something by just verifying some simpler property like that?
Right. So that comes back to the question of actually how the OpenSSL state machine covered a lot of things that we didn't really know or we didn't really believe would be secure, for example. So finished is a good technique for matching conversations, as long as all the key exchanges we support are at least have a basic level of security. If even one of them, like RSA export, does not have the required level of security, finish is too late. By then, the handshake has already been broken. So in fact, some of the attacks that we had were of that form. And the others were also bypassing finished in a certain way, because finished only says, you and I agree on what we received. It doesn't say that what we received actually conforms to any valid trace of SSL. So in Java, I was able to send a finished message, but I only had done 2 messages in the whole trace. And it said, yes, I have these 2, you have these 2, and we're done. But it's not just that. It has to be those two, and they have to be the right two messages that we agree on.
All right, so I had a quick question. So every once in a while, people propose N-way programming as a way to try and cut down on security bugs. So you have N different teams of programmers implementing some against some common reference framework. So would you take this as an example of why that's not going to work, or is this just a particularly hairy piece of code to write and not representative?
I actually don't have a very good answer for this. I mean, I've asked people as to why these bugs, or some of these bugs, appeared in such disparate code bases, some of them closed source, some of them open source, and I don't really have a very good idea of why. My best guess was because they read the standard, everybody read the standard in the same way. My second best guess is that everybody copied OpenSSL or something like that. But we don't know, and it's a good question, actually. Yeah.
All right, let's thank Karthik again.